With a slice and a dash and a gay little hop, Dimitrov returns to his chair where he plops. He's taken the first and he's taken the second. The legacy calls, the finish line beckons. The crowd roars his name and the ball does his bidding. Wait, why is he down there? Are you fucking kidding? Baby-fed heir apparent with the skill and the glory adds another sad chapter to a difficult story. He's blocked me on socials. The judge says I'm a menace. But if I could send one text, it'd be thanks for the tennis. Welcome to the Blurry Turtle Podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by those little bugs that show up when you leave bananas out for too long. So they reached out, made a pretty substantial donation, which I didn't think, little banana bugs had, but that was useful. I did get some advice this week. Someone told me I needed a few more jokes in the podcast, and I'd love to have some for you, but after watching that Sinner Dimitrov match, it's tough. That was hard to watch. Dimitrov, by all accounts, had that match. Wasn't locked up. Sinner always has a chance, but Sinner seems to have an elbow issue, and it was really limiting his ability to play. So, really tough spot for Dimitrov. It reminds me a bit of the Nishioka situation where he got that terrible knee injury against Wawrinka. Was it Wawrinka at first or Nishikori? It was against someone in a major, basically, and he battled back. And he finally got to a big spot in a big tournament again, and then he hurt the same knee. It's just tough to see Dimitrov after a long stretch of, being too injured to really play his best tennis. I was laughing today. I was saying this guy has been injured all year, and he's playing great, and he just, looks like a pectoral tear. That's going to have him out for probably the rest of the season. Everybody wishes him all the best. And some of us, write weird poems about him. So that's where we're at. For now, Sinner moves on. Very lucky, I think. He's, he's getting an MRI tomorrow, and not 100% that he'll be able to play. And if he is able to play, might not be at his best. We'll do the analysis anyway, because, that's why we're here. Shelton sits at 1-6 against Sinner right now. Not really the best. That includes a straight set 6-2, 6-4, 7-6 loss to him last year. Not really a lot to look forward to, but this is a different match here. In that match at Wimbledon, Shelton was at 72% first serves, so 15 aces to 4 double faults. So there's not a lot he can really improve on. He can get that first serve number up, but if you're serving well and you're landing a good percentage and you're still having trouble, you're not really a favorite in that matchup. Sinner was around 70% first serves and 7 aces and no double faults there. So it just kind of shows you that, Sinner's a bit more consistent. I don't know if we'll see a similar matchup here in terms of, numbers and quality. Sinner was at just 58% first serves against Dimitrov, and the elbow issue looked to be hindering his power. He adopted a different approach on forehand returns. He looked to guide and block the ball back a bit more. When he had forehands up high, he looked like he was kind of augmenting his technique a bit. It resulted in some errors. Same thing with the block technique on the forehand returns. It feels like he lost some accuracy there. Just feels like the force transferred to that section of his arm right now is bothering him a bit. So, that's the big story here. Obviously, if Sinner's healthy, then he's the big favorite due to his dominance in the matchup and Shelton not really being his best on grass. But the Sinner that was losing to Dimitrov, I think, can lose to Shelton. So, we'll see the results of the MRI tomorrow. For now, there's no concrete info. I think the problems for Shelton are mostly focus and timing issues. Him and Sonego played an exciting match, but it was one where Shelton gave away some cheap points. He hung back too deep behind the baseline on some shots and made some errors on rally balls. He has the arm to hit big from there, but he needs to be proactive with his footwork against Sinner, since Jannik is so good at creating short angles, really on both wings. Having that big arm, it's something you see with Zverev too. You can play from deep in the court, but you're just expending a lot of extra energy, and the other guy has no reason to miss since he's really not under any pressure. You get to hit a full swing, but he gets a lot of time to see you set up, and to see the ball come to his side. Sinner's returning looked pretty rough, not really automatic against Dimitrov, so I do think Shelton will be able to take care of his serve here, even if Sinner takes the court. Kind of a column A, column B thing. The elbow issue was a problem, but Dimitrov served incredibly well. So, the level that Dimitrov brought into that game was great. It was the same thing I saw against Offner. When he got short returns, he closed out. He did the same thing against Sinner, which is very impressive because that's one of the best defenders on tour. Shelton for sure has the same capabilities, if not heavier firepower, but he just needs to be efficient here. Depending on Sinner to show up injured, not really a guarantee this guy will get the best medical treatment in the world. If it's not something structural, like as far as the injury, then, Sinner can get treatment. He can take painkillers. He might be able to play near his best. I don't know if he'll be sharp. He didn't look automatic today. He didn't look automatic in some of the earlier rounds, but he looked a lot more consistent there. So I think there is a legitimate elbow issue here. Either way, Shelton, he'll want to dig in, and he has a good chance to win. Knowing your opponent might be injured can mess with your head a bit as far as shot selection, but it does make you want to go for the long haul. The stylistic issues that he had in the past are Sinner being a great returner, Sinner having a solid backhand. Sinner's backhand will still be good here. I think the forehand is affected more, but having to avoid his forehand isn't really a thing anymore, right? If he's injured. So Shelton can spread the court. He can go to Jannik's forehand. I'm sure his team is going to have him serve Jannik's forehand as often as possible. And if Shelton gets short replies, he's able to score on the top players in the world. He's shown that time and time again. This is a huge moment for Shelton. Nobody wants to win via injury. Sinner looked crushed. When Dimitrov got hurt, he went over and sat by him when the doctors were consulting, which is, could be eavesdropping for some players, but you can tell Sinner just really did not want him to be, in that bad of shape. Sinner's a great mover, but I don't think anybody really recovers position fully on grass. I watch Djokovic, I watch Alcaraz, I watched a bunch of guys, get out of position and hit decent shots. Still on the next ball, the other guy's walking to net and finishing the rally. So, it's hard to say just use your legs because your arm is not there. I think Sinner needs to be, 80, 90% with that arm or he probably loses here. I don't know what his team will do if he is injured, but still looking to take the court. I don't know when they would pull the ripcord on that. I don't know if they mind him losing a match. Some of the big champions kind of try to mitigate those situations. Everybody wants to play for a major. Sinner obviously wants to get out there and ball, but the question of whether you're injuring yourself further, whether you're hurting your legacy kind of playing in those matches is something I'm sure they'll discuss. It sounds a bit petty, but behind the scenes, there is that PR aspect to tennis where you want to, cultivate the legacy. For Sinner, the Shelton equation's one he solved before. There's a decent chance that with his history against Shelton, he has a good read on the service motion and on the shot selection. Since Ben plays a little bit behind the baseline sometimes, Sinner might be okay. So it could be a game management situation. We've seen Djokovic, manage matches where he wasn't 100% and just, anticipate, move to the ball. That is something Sinner can do. So if he's less than 100%, just isolate Shelton's backhand as much as he can. Try to keep the points somewhat short. He did serve okay in the third set against Dimitrov. He didn't look like he was guaranteed to lose the set there, even if he was in trouble. So I'm not sure what to see here. It's a big mystery here with Sinner's arm not looking good. I think the chance for an upset is high. We'll really have to take a look in the first set. Just keep an eye on that arm and how it feels. There's a lot of gamesmanship accusations with the top players for, injuries during a tournament, but this is one that's not made up. Cobolli and Djokovic, I'm very surprised. I took a look at the prices. I saw minus 1,600 for Djokovic. I don't really think that makes sense. Djokovic is the greatest of all time, all the stats, everything. He's won Wimbledon 7 times. But Cobolli's playing the best tennis of his life. I don't think Djokovic has been shutting people out so far. He had a great comeback in the fourth set against De Minaur. It's good to see he can still do that and just shut people down. He's playing solid, but I think, Cobolli has a different game than De Minaur. He's a little more dangerous. So I was actually able to catch my first full Cobolli match. I've caught games of his, and I thought he was playing, well, but he's a level above his best tennis right now. He just didn't blink against Cilic. Early on he was having timing issues with his backhand on the return to serve. Shanked a few in the net. It looked like Cilic had a good chance, but Flavio ironed that out and started to play really solid. It was a skillful match, and Cilic was just the one who ran out of shots. The difference in offensive attempts is something Djokovic is not going to give you. Djokovic is not going to give you errors on rally balls. He's not going to force the issue when he doesn't have to. Cilic really crashed out of the match by just playing, one bad service game per set. At the same time, if one bad service game per set is costing you the match, it tells you something about the offense the other guy is playing. That's the reason I think Cobolli can be effective here, is once he hit that level, he never really dropped it. He's serving better than I've ever seen. Second serve is hit with full confidence in the technique. He's hitting his backhand well. I don't really like his backhand in the past, but he's spreading the court well here. It's not going to score hitting your backhand straight or out wide, inside out, but it is going to get you out of those backhand exchanges where Djokovic is going to bury you. So, for his first quarterfinals at a major, it's extremely well deserved. He's playing really well. So, Djokovic presents a unique problem. It's never easy, but I think this might be close. I think the big difference between Djokovic and Cilic is that, Djokovic doesn't give you as much. Cilic is trying to create on every single ball, and Djokovic is happy to rally. So, Cobolli might feel a bit trapped here. He might feel like he's the one who has to create. I haven't really seen Djokovic turning points around from bad positions, like I said earlier. So Cobolli will be able to score, but getting into those positions is the key. Djokovic isn't the best returner on tour anymore, so Cobolli should hold serve a good chunk of the time. Managing the emotions in a big moment against a big name is his main task here, because his tennis is fine. Alex played great against Djokovic, but he's not really the biggest server, so I think Cobolli's actually a tougher task here. De Minaur and Djokovic exchanged 12 breaks, and Cobolli was broken only once. Obviously, Djokovic is a better returner than Cilic, but it's still a big upgrade in the task at hand for Novak. Mentality is worth mentioning here. Djokovic's team will have been gearing up for a potential clash with Sinner. If Sinner is in questionable health, it's entirely likely that the budgeting stamina that goes out the window. It's just, you can let more go if you don't have as many difficult rounds to play later. Obviously, they won't completely look past him, but he has to game plan his way through. If he has Cobolli and then Sinner, that's a heavier workload. If he might get Cobolli and then Shelton, he can expend more energy against Cobolli. Basically, I think the more your big opponents start to look vulnerable, the more you start to think, I just want to get through this one next match. I just want to get there because I think I have a good chance. I like Djokovic to win here. I just think it's going to be a big test. De Minaur's speed did allow him to extend rallies. The flat hitting was basically at red line the entire match. But Cobolli's offense is a lot better than his right now. Not as great in extended points. De Minaur's movement and his ability to take his forehand down the line and come in after it really is a key. His speed was really useful on defense. Just putting the extra ball back, putting pressure on Djokovic. I just don't think, I don't think Cobolli will be in those situations. If he is, he's cooked. If Djokovic is moving him well, I don't think Cobolli's going to defend his way through this match. I just think he has, the puncher's chance here to win a set or two. It's kind of funny. I think Cobolli's tougher, but I would have De Minaur probably beating him just by outlasting him. I just think Cobolli has bigger weapons. Djokovic had some trouble today with his forehand when the ball landed deep on the baseline. Timing-wise, he looked a bit frustrated. Even though the baseline is chewed up in those spots, I still think, the timing issues and the reactions are something that might continue. So I like, you can't obviously hit the baseline for an entire match, but I think Djokovic is not supremely confident here. there'll be some confidence. I think they've only met. Well, I don't think. I know that they've only met once before in Shanghai, and Djokovic won 1 and 2. So, some of the minus 1,600 could be connected there. I just think, right now that's a lazy. That's like maybe a model price. They're running numbers and not really looking at the situation at hand. This is the second big test for Djokovic here. Think he can win in 4 or 5. Based off the levels last round, Cobolli might look a bit better just because he played such an offensive match. But Cilic is not as tough a matchup as Alex de Minaur. Djokovic will have been tempering his offense and knowing he can't really make a lot of errors there. Also, Alex, like I said, he redlined the whole time. I just think Alex's serve is not really that good. So, Cobolli's going to be, I'd just say it would take longer for Djokovic to make inroads there. Djokovic and de Minaur broke each other a bunch. I don't think we'll see that here. Obviously, Djokovic has a ton left in the tank, and it is looking like this is a really good chance for him to win a major. Alcaraz, he beat Rublev comfortably, sort of, but didn't really look at his best and didn't look automatic. So, you have a case here where suddenly the 3 top players they're advancing, but they're starting to look vulnerable. So, this is a round where I think a lot of players will want to make a statement, want to start to get through quickly, set up that semifinal where you're fresh and where the other guy is the one who's starting to worry a little bit. Public reception doesn't matter at all in your head on the court, but, it's out there. These guys will be aware of who's believing in who, and when those doubts creep in, if there's been 2,000 articles posted about this not being your moment, it can make you a bit vulnerable. So should be a really interesting match there. When Djokovic wins in straight sets, I expect my inbox to be flooded with a lot of mean comments, and I appreciate all of you. Fritz and Khachanov. Yeah, Fritz is, completely backed it up. He got to the easy part of the draw and got an easy match. It feels well-deserved. I didn't realize Thompson was injured, actually, but he had to withdraw after just 1 set. So that's really good for Fritz to get a few days rest because it's just all difficult from here. Obviously, once you're into the quarters of a major, there's nothing easy. But, Fritz really was grinding through a terrible draw while some of his opponents were getting some easy matchups, So it's good to get him a little bit of a break there. Tricky matchup here. Khachanov pretty much always plays to the level of his opponent. So Fritz has actually made a significant error here by getting good at tennis. Khachanov went to 5 with Mochizuki. He's a great player, but, more on the challenger level a lot of the times. He did great at Junior Wimbledon, so I shouldn't write him off. But, Mochizuki had a 5-setter with Zeppieri the round before, so you'd expect Khachanov to win that a bit closer. Khachanov, again, went to 5 with Borges. He had to really grind it out, and then he plays Majrzak, who's playing the tennis of his life. And that just, upped the level from Karen. Khachanov's backhand basically won the match. He just crushed the ball the whole time. He took the ball down the line well, but it really just felt like the weight of shot and the backhand exchanges made it impossible for Camille to get anything going. It's a good result for Majrzak to make the 4th round. Kudos to him. We'll see more of him. He's good on hard court. He's had some big results in the past and, battled back from some injury issues. So probably finds his way on tour eventually, as long as he keeps that first serve percentage getting better and better. I think that's just a fitness thing for him because he can land it. Khachanov leads the head-to-head 2-0 here, but both of those matches were back in 2020, so can't really take them too much into account. Fritz was like an entirely different human being at that time. He wasn't really, Khachanov was the type of player who would beat him. Anyone who was really going to dig in, make him grind it out, was just going to win off unforced errors because Fritz was still trying to iron out his game. Are you an offensive player? Are you grinding? And I think at the time he really didn't have the stamina to grind. His fitness is much better now. Tennis-wise, they're both in good form. Fritz has a really solid backhand, doesn't really score with it. I think that's the spot Khachanov can score a bit, makes this a backhand exchange match and just thrive off tough bounces and extra pace. It's a bit bigger because he takes a larger cut at it, and he takes the ball down the line a lot better. So on the forehand wing, the opposite happens. Fritz is better at producing offense. It's a cleaner technique. Khachanov hits heavy, but not really sharp angles, not really, surprise winners. It's a little easier to read his forehand. Goes a bit more with, power and spin than accuracy. So, they each have the exchanges they want. I think they both hit big enough that it's going to be hard for either one to really hit clean winners. I think you'll see both players get pretty fatigued by the end of this match, and then whoever, can execute better is going to be there. I think that's, why serving is probably the answer here. Similar power on the serve, but Fritz's technique is way more repeatable. Little less predictable also. I noticed on big points, if Khachanov has set point, if Khachanov has, game point in a big game, he'll go wide from the ad side. Little tendencies like that are, they're useful. Fritz's team will have scouted that out, and I think Fritz spreads the court better on his serve. He doesn't have a problem going either direction, and he can dial up a bit more pace. I do like to see players, as they progress in their career, getting more accurate and, saving the power for the big moment. You definitely see Djokovic, on a big point, suddenly he'll go tee with a bunch of pace where, earlier he was, hitting body serves and trying to just play position more than pace. I think if Fritz is able to get returns in play, he should win. I still think it's another 4 or 5 setter for him. A day of rest is great, but Khachanov has success against him. Khachanov has a ton of experience at this point also. In the quarterfinals of majors, he was getting there frequently for a handful of seasons. I don't think he'll be surprised that he's back, playing a guy you've beaten before. There's a bit of confidence. I know he'll know that Fritz is at the end of a long grind, so he'll want to play, deep anyway. I don't think there'll be fatigue issues from Khachanov, even though he's played some 5-setters. The last round was pretty quick, and Khachanov is a big guy with a lot of strength. So this should be really, really good. All week I've been questioning when Fritz is going to burn out, but I think that the 2-3 days of rest here just resets him. Big opportunity for both, obviously. I think Fritz wins in 5. Norrie Alcaraz. Just realized I'm not moving the... There you go. I moved the screen. I really do need to do something about the screen issue. I'll show you guys, I don't know, nature videos or something, or I'll go somewhere in the forest and let you see some squirrels and birds, because this can't be too exciting. But, maybe it's not that exciting. Whatever. Norrie and Alcaraz, some spicy meatballs after the Jarry and Norrie match, as Jarry seemed to complain about Norrie's timing on second serves. He was stalling a bit, bouncing the ball, getting ready, and then going back to bouncing the ball. Something Cilic was kind of doing this week too. I actually noticed today Cilic served the ball much quicker, didn't bounce as many times. So, it could just be a fatigue issue. And honestly, if you're fatigued, yeah, you're gonna stall a little before your serve. The shot clock is not on. It's hard to really make a case for it being something that you have to deal with. If a lot of guys start doing it, or you lobby to the tour, they can make some rule. Cap the number of bounces or something. I don't know what it would be, but it just, wasn't great. Kind of thought for a second that I thought Jarry might have been asking about Norrie's dive. The flat on your back collapse is pretty cliched in tennis, but it's standard. But Jarry did a dive roll at match point trying to get to a rally, and Norrie did a dive roll also. He rolled once or twice, which I thought was, I thought he was excited. I thought, if he mocked him, I don't know. I've done that with friends. They dive for something, and I dive next to them and look over at them, and they reach out and slap me. It's fun. Even if you're right, I think after a loss, complaining just looks kind of bad. It's kind of best to skip it, even if you have an issue. I think press will bring it up if there's an issue. Press wants to hear something. It'll give you a chance to air it when you're calmer, and you can kind of take a balanced take. Right after you lost, complaining kind of lets the people online get at you. They're gonna say it's because you lost. They're gonna say you're salty or you're jealous or anything. You're really only gonna attract the fans of the other opponent who are looking for an argument. So, not really useful there. Jarry had a great tournament. Obviously, I hope he's not remembered for a little altercation at the end. I do actually like, when the players call each other out. I just think, it's not terribly productive because you don't have a real problem with him. It seems like they squashed it and shook hands afterwards. So, who knows? Who cares? I think Norrie's game style is designed to frustrate opponents, so it's not really surprising that he'd engage in some gamesmanship, light gamesmanship, extra bounces. He makes a point of shouting "Let's go" in the language of his opponents if he plays someone and speaks that language. So I don't think people should pay him any mind, honestly. If you're playing that guy and he's doing something that's frustrating you, he's happy about that. If he's doing something that's frustrating you and he's not aware of it, it's even worse because now you're just, you're getting thrown off your game. And I think the way Norrie plays is very frustrating. He's trying to outlast you. He's trying to force you to come up with shots from tough spots. The flat backhand looks just mentally exhausting to play against. So if you're focusing on the other stuff, it's not great. For now, he's into the quarters. That massively saves Norrie's season. He was looking pretty pedestrian to start the year, so this is a huge turnaround. Playing at home, it's going to give him good energy. I think shutting down Jari's offense is a good result. Now he has to shut down a better offense against a guy who can move better. The analysis here is pretty generic. I think right now Alcaraz just does everything better than Cam. He hits bigger off both wings. He moves better, more variety, better hands at net. He serves better. So because of that, I think there doesn't need to be a huge strategy here. No big adjustment. There'll be tendencies. You might want to serve, you might want to body serve here a bit because Cam has such a big extension on his backhand. I feel like it's tough for him to, he'll try to get the ball deep from there, but he won't really hit big. He might want to isolate Cam's forehand just because, in rallies, just because it'll give him more height to use. It's a focus test for Carlos here. He has lapses in judgment, swings for the fences early on. He's not going to get the crowd support here, I think, that he does in every other match. So that's really interesting to me. Even against Sinner, it feels like the crowd was just for Alcaraz. His style of play, the way he fights, the way he makes extra gets, the way he goes for shots. It's all, I wouldn't say designed, but it's all perfect for getting the crowd on his side. So, playing the British favorite, he's not going to have that. It's going to be interesting to see how he reacts. I don't really see a path for Norrie to get by here unless Carlos implodes, but there's some hope for him. Rublev obviously hits bigger than Cam, but Alcaraz made a number of unforced timing errors in that match. 41 winners to 36 unforced errors is okay. Anytime you're positive, you can say you played decent. But I felt the overall level of the match early on was a little sloppy. A lot of balls in the net, a lot of balls, a lot of offensive attempts that went wide. So, Cam will look to test that, And early in the match, Alcaraz could be a little unfocused. So it's a focus issue for him because I think if Alcaraz can get going early, he'll keep the crowd quiet and he has the advantage in most of the facets of the game. I used to say Alcaraz had a slight issue with lefties. That feels like obviously it's faded a bit. If anything, it was only an issue because his backhand was the slightly more defensive region of his game. So if you're lefty, if you're playing in those traditional patterns and hitting the ball cross court all the time, you're going to hang on a bit longer in rallies. I like Alcaraz in 3 or 4 here. If it goes deep, I start to like Djokovic's chances a little more. There's really no point, Cam up 2 sets. I still make it pretty even. I don't believe Alcaraz is unbeatable at this point. These new champions are not unbeatable. They can have lapses. They can, we saw today, they can have injuries. Alcaraz can lose focus a bit, but not really at the majors. He's kind of already, beaten that hurdle. And in a long match, he has enough time to lock in. He has enough of everything to win this match. I just think if he keeps dropping sets against guys, I think I start to like Djokovic's chances. I think with his team, you're not going to tell him you need to win in straight sets, but this is one where you kind of want to make a statement, just kind of make it clear to the rest of the draw that you're the favorite,